Hi, this video is going to walk through how to teach the Be Good People curriculum, and specifically the Core Edition, which is designed for Tier 1 school-wide instruction, and specifically the content for the 6th through 8 or middle school grade band. And we're looking at the main Be Good People webpage right now. And the reason I started here is because I wanted to walk through, there's three main ingredients, we like to call them, for the Be Good People curriculum. The first on the left is lessons, and these are the most structured and rigorous of the ingredients. It's pretty obvious, we're talking about a skill, we're talking through step by step, although by the time we get to middle school, it's a little bit less obvious, a little bit less structured, but still, the most structured ingredient. And that's where I'll start once we dig in. Extension activities are very popular once we get to middle school because for the most part, these are long videos, and I mean like 6 to 10 minutes-ish is a rough ballpark, that we have split into component pieces. So we'll have like 90-minute segments of the video followed by one or two discussion questions. So very appealing from a pacing and engagement standpoint. And community building is not content focused. So these two lessons and extension activities are pointed at specific 6 through 8 SEL benchmarks, where community building is would you rather questions, icebreaker questions, and the point is just to get to know each other better. So without further ado, I'm going to click on 6 through 8. And this is all the curriculum content right here, like it's just a menu of all of it, but this isn't your day-to-day, shouldn't be your day-to-day tool as far as pacing or scope and sequence. Ideally, hopefully your school has a scope and sequence schedule. So for this week, we do this topic or this activity during advisory. So they take all this and organize it for you. But I'm going to have a separate video about scope and sequence planning. The one thing I wanted to mention is that those three ingredients I talked about, most middle schools will kind of go between them, rotate between them on a week-to-week basis. So you're not going to do 5 lessons in a row. You might do a lesson, then one or two extension activities, then some community building. So week to week, you're going to have a different format and different thing that you're doing, which again, from an engagement standpoint, kind of breaks it up for students. And we've just had a lot of teacher feedback forming what that scope and sequence looks like and really liking that rotation. So like I said, I'm going to start with a lesson, then I'm going to go into an example extension activity, and then we'll just look at community building briefly. So I was going to look at, let's look at accepting feedback. So a couple of things to mention here as we look at just the first slide we see. One is that, it's accepting feedback, and that's the skill label in the bottom left corner. So really that's for an organizational reason, like from K all the way through 12, we'll have the same skill label for these lessons if the skill is the same. So I like to say call a spade a spade. Kindergartners have to accept feedback, so do 12th graders. It's nice to have that consistent label so that we know kind of what we're talking about. But students are going to see this more accessible, more engaging. Often it's a question at the front of the lesson. So in this case, instead of accepting feedback, is all criticism constructive? So like I said, often these are questions. And we just had a lot of teacher feedback that this would be more engaging for students to have like some kind of reflective question at the beginning versus kind of a directive skill label on the slide. And then you see a little paragraph that I would probably just honestly read. Like today we're going to talk about how to respectfully receive different kinds of feedback, like praise or constructive criticism. And I might expound or add on to that. One thing you're going to hear me say throughout this video in all likelihood is that, these are not meant to be scripted. There's not a script here that you are carrying around in your hands and reading the bolded sentences like some other curriculum. So we want to put enough on the slide so that it gives you a starting point. And then if you just are having a tough time or just for whatever reason, if you just need to read the slide, it'll do enough. But it's always good to add on and expound as much as we feel comfortable and as much as we have time for, if that makes sense. So in the bottom right corner, you're going to see a learning badge. And these learning badges represent the 5 SEL standards. So self-management is one of those 5 standards. And it's a nice connective tissue between all the activities and lessons in the curriculum. So students will see those 5 learning badges all over the place. And it's that connective tissue, like I said. Beneath it, you'll see a more specific benchmark code that you can reference for the SEL benchmark we're talking about. And then in the bottom right corner, just the really basic information, like we are looking at a lesson. It's from the core edition, which is why it's green. So it's just the basic piece of like, what am I looking at? And then in the speaker notes, all of them are going to have this link to share feedback, which we really appreciate. Like you've already heard me, you're going to hear me repeat it more. Pretty much every decision in here, from the colors, from the sequence of the slides, from everything, has been informed by a huge amount of teacher feedback. So it's really crucial that we keep that communication flowing and keep making this thing better. So we really appreciate feedback. A link to visit the SEL Be Good People website. So that's where we came from. It gets you back here so you can access more materials. And then a link to our mailing list sign-up. So we always recommend that at least like some instructional leaders, if not all teachers, at least a couple instructional leaders in the building subscribe to our mailing list. It's not spam. I run it. And as we develop the curriculum, every 2 weeks or every month during the school year, we send out an update with some really essential need-to-know information about what has changed about the curriculum or what we've added to it. So highly recommend that. And now that I've talked about everything on this opening slide, I will say, before you dive into teaching this to students, always put it in present mode. So I click slideshow up in the right corner of my screen, top right corner, because some of these have animations on them. And generally speaking, there's a variety of other reasons why you just want this to be in full screen present mode on your smart board or whatever you're using to project, versus letting students see all these slides. And just put it in present mode. What you're going to see on every single slide 2 of every single lesson is like an attention getter. So for the most part, these are going to be short vertical videos. So, 10 to 45 seconds long, generally speaking. So I would click and play that. And then we have some discussion questions for you. Some of these are going to have quotes on them. And some of them are going to have little, it's like a quote from a student with some reflection questions, but always like an attention getter, because we don't want to just dive right into content. We want to spark some curiosity from the students and some interest. So like I said, for the most part, just because of teacher preference, it's been for videos. By and large, videos have been the most desirable thing. So we just have these short videos to get things cooking. Then again, driven by teacher feedback, folks have wanted the why, or the rationale of why are we talking about this, as early in the lesson as possible. So pretty much the third slide you're generally going to encounter is like a why is this important? So why knowing how to handle feedback matters. I might ask students, if I have time, I'm going to ask this question, why do you think this matters? And try and get some responses. If I get crickets, I can use the sentences on this slide to spark some conversation and get the ball rolling. So I can read one of these and then ask, like, has that been true for any of you? Like, the first one says, you can prevent small little issues from turning into big, significant problems that are harder to deal with. And if I have a personal example that I'm willing to share with students, I'll definitely throw it out there, because again, that's just going to be more relevant and meaningful to them. And it's an opportunity to build relationships and trust. So if I have that, I'm going to throw it out there. I'm going to ask them, like, has that been true for any of you guys? So as much as I can do to engage, I'm going to do that and get students to interact with the lesson versus just being sit and get. That's what I don't want, is preaching and sit and get. And that kind of brings me to, on the right side of the slide, we're always going to have like 4 values icons. And the point here is we had a lot of feedback from teachers saying, I want to talk about values more often. I want it to be a regular part of our dialogue in school for students to be thinking about what their values are or what they could be, and reflecting on how their behavior is or isn't reflecting those values. So what I would typically ask here is, like, what is the way that I handle feedback have to do with bravery? Like, if bravery is a big value to me, or self-control, or just self-improvement, what does feedback have to do with that? And I don't have to be the expert here. That's one of the pieces of advice I was going to share. One of the most frequent things we hear from teachers is that You have to wrap your head around not being the expert when you're delivering this material, because it's okay to not know the answer. If you say, like, I'm not exactly sure what handling feedback has to do with bravery. Does anybody have an idea? And if you invite students to be creative, often they step up to the plate with that. But it's okay. You don't have to know every answer. You don't have to be the content expert, even though, as some high school teachers have told me, like, if you're a functioning adult, which all of you are, you work in a school, if you're a functional adult, you kind of are the expert for a lot of these topics. So give yourself some credit, they say. So after we get past our why slide, this is another piece of teacher feedback. Like, we used to have these scenarios. This is a scenario for applying the skill. We used to have these just at the end of the lesson, but it was requested that we have one of them early to help stir a conversation about prior knowledge. So before, we just had questions here, and you see that at the bottom, like, what wisdom would you share with a younger person? That's getting at prior knowledge. What do they already know about the topic that we're discussing? And we used to just have those questions, but it was requested again that we have scenarios here to kind of stir the pot, give students something to bounce off of. So there's going to be a scenario. These are written in third person about other students. That was, again, teacher feedback, that it was putting students too much onus on them to have it be in first person, because some of the scenarios used to be during art class. I'm probably getting first and second confused. Anyway, during art class, your teacher asks each student. So again, teachers ask that we change that to Ben's teacher, because it just makes it easier for students to engage with the scenario if they don't have to say what they would do. They just have to talk about what Ben should do. So it says, how should Ben handle this situation? And then again, we're getting at prior knowledge. That's the point. What wisdom would you share? So I would honestly throw both of these questions at students at the same time and let them respond to either one, because that's kind of still the same purpose. We're trying to get at prior knowledge. What do they know early in this lesson about this topic? And then we get to kind of an overarching recipe or roadmap for the skill. So again, I'm going to reference how things used to be a little bit here. We used to dig into each of these skill steps one by one. And there were a variety of reasons why we changed that. One, it just felt too directive and prescriptive for students, and just a little bit too granular, if that makes sense. So we pulled back from the way we teach it in elementary, which again is kind of going through these step by step. We still have this overarching, though, recipe for, in this case, how do you accept feedback? Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. But we just present it to students and use it as an opportunity. And some teachers tell me this is their students' favorite slide, that they get the best discussion out of. That just honestly hasn't been my experience. There are just other slides that students have found more engaging, but it's just cool that this is the most appealing slide for some students. But it's just asking, what about this sounds right and what might be missing? So it's really looking for that analysis of, like, what is missing here, what needs extra explanation, which one of these pieces might not apply in certain situations. So you're not preaching at the kids, which is something that really shuts down the engagement with these topics for adolescents. You're inviting them, and it's okay to disagree. You just want to get them talking. That, again, is one of the most frequent things I hear from teachers in middle and high schools, is I just want to get them engaged and reflective and talking. And it's okay if I disagree with them. I just want to get them to be interacting on the topics. And that leads to, generally, we're going to have like one or two tips here. So instead of, again, going through these steps in detail, we just have like one or two kind of tips. And I would just read these and then spark whatever discussion I want. One thing, in pretty much every lesson, you're going to have these GIFs or GIFs. I never know which one is really the right word, but GIFs or GIFs, which, again, teacher feedback. Just we wanted more visuals that are engaging, going to draw students in. And then finally, we get to application. So there's going to be generally 4 scenarios. And again, this is a cool moment when we kind of unlocked this format, this choice board here, that got people excited, because we know that choice is really engaging for kids and invites them in. They get to make a decision about what kind of way they're responding to this scenario, so they could play it out, so they could take the tips and that roadmap or that recipe we showed them earlier and just say, like, how would that look in this situation? Words of wisdom. similar, but just a little bit different. It's just kind of like, what advice, if you could like stop time and share some advice with Claire in this scenario, what would you say to her? Heads up is a really, I think, a lower bar, easier to access for students. It's just like, what shouldn't we do? So like, what are some things that could go wrong here that Claire should try and avoid? And then lessons learned really invites them to say like, hey, I've been through a similar situation. Doesn't even have to be exactly the same, but it's just something that comes to their mind and something they learned from it. So students can choose one of these four. And this is an opportunity to say the other piece of advice I always hear from middle and high school teachers is that we don't have to do everything with whole group instruction. So think, pair, shares, for example, letting students talk to the person next to them together about one of these questions, and then open it up to whole group discussion, gives students a smaller, less socially pressured opportunity to ideate and talk it over with somebody, and then they're more confident sharing with the rest of the group. I'm basically just describing why think, pair, shares can be a valuable pedagogical technique in general. But one thing we linked in here is a student handout, optional. So if you want to do an ink pair share, you could just use scratch paper really, but it's just a little bit more. This is a general handout that you could keep. It's not specific to any lessons, so you could keep a stack of these in your classroom and just use them whenever you see this choice board. You could use these. So there's two versions, and again, this is completely optional. This is just an extra little tool if you want to support that ink pair share. And there's two variations. One, if you use this one, would be kind of like there's 4 scenarios, there's 4 ways to respond. So you could put a little pressure on students where, if they use play it out on the first scenario, that's off limits, and they have to then go to one of the other options for the subsequent scenarios. So it's just a little, I don't know, it's kind of like a little bit more gamified. Like they got to make a strategic decision about which one they're going to use. I think that's just kind of fun. The other option, though, if you want to put a little bit less pressure on them, is just for any scenario, they can just circle and pick any response technique. So pros and cons, but it's completely up to you. There, I'm offering you guys a choice. And then the skip to end button is there because I might, the point is quality, not quantity. If we have really robust and meaningful discussion about this one, fine. If we run out of time in advisory, the skip to end button is just there. I can click it and go right to the end of the lesson. We really put that there just so that teachers have that signal like, hey, it's okay to pace down and it's okay not to finish. It's better to have, like I said, meaningful dialogue than to rush through all 4 scenarios. And then the end of the lesson has this kind of looks like a level complete video game graphic. That's the goal here. But it has that learning badge from the front of the lesson from slide 1. So we're reflecting on what we learned. And then it has those values icons as well. So I could put this up there and not address it verbally, but typically if I have time, I'm going to say like, all right, guys, great work today. We learned about self-management, about bravery, efficiency, self-control, or improvement. If I really want to send a strong message, I might be comfortable saying something inspiring about taking those values and those skills out into the rest of their school day. But different flavors, different folks, you're going to have your own thing to say. But that's a typical lesson. And I'm going to then look at extension activities because in a typical grade, in a typical week-to-week schedule, I'd say lessons in the middle schools I work with are 30% of the weeks are lessons, if that. What is the majority of weeks, I would say, is these extension activities. And like I said, video discussion format is very, very popular. So I'm going to click on my good friend Simone Biles. I had a lot of positive feedback about her videos in this activity last year. So again, this is similar to the lessons we looked at, but it's a little bit different. It's got extension activity down here instead of lesson. It's still got the learning badge because like I said, those are everywhere. It's always going to have these little buttons in the top. Well, they're not buttons, but little graphics in the top left, right corner that tell you kind of what content we're looking at. In this case, it's a video and discussion questions. Teachers requested, this time is really helpful for pacing, shows me how much video in total there is, 7 minutes and 45 seconds, and it's split into 3 chunks. So I know that when we finish clip number 1, there's a lot of reminders that there's 2 more. So it just helps me pace again. And one feature, this isn't on all of them, but when we have topics about mental health or bullying, there's always a message that looks like this that gives you an opportunity to, pause and message to students what's coming and give them some prefaces. But yeah, I would go through it. The clip will stop by itself. They're generally in like 2-minute chunks on average, I'd say. And then there's a couple discussion questions. And like I said, think pair shares are your best friend as long as it suits your group and they stay on topic, which doesn't always happen, we know, with middle schoolers, but letting them talk to each other and then share with the whole group is a good way to manage these discussion questions. And then, like I said, it's going to end and show you that learning badge because that's a really common feature. And then finally, we scroll down. Well, I missed one thing, apologize. These take it further integrates. So these activities, like I said, are still really for advisory or wherever it fits in your master schedule, but it's probably going to be advisory. But we know that SEL happens all day. Social emotional learning happens all day. So in math, ELA, science, social studies, all day long. You can be intentional with the way you do group work or peer feedback or really anything that's happening in your classroom to boost SEL skills. So we have these integration ideas. And then finally, I'm going to talk about community building. So like I said, icebreakers, would you rather questions, a pretty paltry number of games right now, but we're always learning and growing. But let's just click on one of these. So generally these are going to be in packs of 4. And teachers have said pretty much like, I don't get to all 4, but I like that there's 4. Because if my students don't like one of the questions, we can skip it. And having that choice is really helpful to me. So, we take that to heart. So most of these are going to be about 4 questions because it just seems to be the happy medium for everybody as far as the number of questions that they can fit into your typical advisory. And then, like I said, those badges are everywhere. So even by getting to know each other and just doing a little bit of icebreaker activity, we're practicing social awareness, that empathy, perspective taking, and then relationship skills. And that is pretty much it. Like I said, most middle schools are going to rotate between those 3 activities we talked about, about maybe 20-30% lessons, a good chunk like 50-60% extension activities, and then community building kind of making up the rest. But it's really up to you. That's why we say 3 ingredients, limitless recipes. I hope you had a great time with this video. I hope you enjoy teaching Be Good People, and I hope your students get a lot out of it. Thank you so much for your time. Have a good one.